Thank you for joining us today. Our topic is LIBOR Transition 2021, Taking the Leap. Our host for the webinar is Dean Snyder. Before we get started, there are a few items I'd like to review so you know how to participate in today's event. We have a couple of polls today, and we would ask when you see the polls to please participate. Please note that your responses are anonymous and won't be seen by the attendees. We do encourage questions. Please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions, and we'll leave some time at the end of the prepared remarks to answer as many questions as possible. We are recording today's session, and tomorrow you will receive an email with a link to listen or download the presentation. Thank you for joining us today. Dean?
Thank you, Renee, and welcome everybody to today's latest update on the LIBOR transition. And I'll be giving you some of the latest reports on AFS development status, as well as how our clients are doing. And I'm joined by my colleague, Charles Wambua, today. And Charles will provide us an update from the ARC Bank Working Group and the latest updates in the market. Certainly, we've been reading a lot about Ameribor and other alternative reference rates. We'll talk a little bit about those, what AFS is doing, and then we will wrap up with the opportunity for some questions. We might be a little shorter today, and maybe that's a good sign that we really are approaching, the end of this long journey. And that, if I'm counting right, started 2 years and 3 months ago, right, where we had our first ARC Bank Working Group meeting up in New York. So if we move on, I'll provide you a little bit of update from where we are at AFS. We can go to the next slide, please. And pleased to report that with our AFS Level 3 clients, we've completed the development items, and everyone is in some form of implementation. Some ready to go, some still doing testing. But things are progressing well. I think there have been a few mitigation items that AFS has worked on, but overall, I think the rollout has been very positive, especially knowing that we've got Level 3 clients on various versions or releases of the software, but we've been able to work with each one with their implementation. And on the Vision side as well, our Vision clients are in stages of implementation. We are continuing to do some remaining work with observation shift, especially around some of the other currency rates like Sonia and Esther over in the European market. So still some work that's going on there and some final definition as well. We're continuing to do some enhancements around sales and trading of loans that would be on SOFR to deal with the various interest calculation components when you're in different stages of a loan trade. We've talked about a lot of issues in the last 2 years. Recently, we've had some pretty good dialogue around the Good Friday holiday scenario and really what happens because now with SOFR, we're dealing with not just the loan market, but we're dealing with the derivative market as well, and determining which markets are following which calendars or which holidays. And I think we were able to work through those issues, and with the ability to define your own calendars and your own work days, non-work days, or holidays, I believe we've reached consensus and resolution on all of that. If there's any specific questions at the end, I'm sure we can deal with those. I'll ask my colleague and Charles to help if we have any remaining questions around holidays. There's also been some recent discussion around floors. As you know, there were some additional requirements for floors for SOFR rates, especially when you're compounding the SOFR rates, and how those floors should work, not just with your loan products, but also with your derivative products. And I think in talking to our clients, Some are tracking derivatives on their loan platform. Some are doing them in a different platform and trying to reconcile the rates and the calculations between the two, especially with the various floor scenarios. So we did want to ask a question today about floors, and I think we can go to that slide. And the question, because we've asked before, and we want to continue to check to see if things are changing or where you stand. So if you're planning to use floors in anticipation of lower rates or possibly negative rates, are you still looking at writing in floor language into your SOFR language with your credit agreements? So this is your opportunity to vote whether floors are being considered or being used by the bank, or I've heard some say that they were not going to apply floors on the SOFR pricing the deals. So hopefully you're able to cast your vote. Be anxious to see where we stand today on this particular topic. So I'll ask Renee, do we have vote results in yet?
Yes, we do. I'm going to close the poll. And sorry, there you go.
Wow, okay. Well, that confirms that the vast majority are planning to utilize the floor language with their SOFR loans, and I think there's been some questions about any challenges you might have or whatever with your language within your credit agreements and how you represent that with the floors. So it looks like the vast majority of the respondents today are planning to go forward with that. One of the other questions, of course, is where do you stand in your preparedness overall from your loan platform perspective, right? So you can see as we polled, I think we're tracking 20 of our AFS clients today who have provided us updates, and you will see that 3/4 of those banks either are ready today or will be ready by the end of June, which is fast approaching. And I think there's still a number that maybe are going slightly past June, but this hopefully is helpful for you to see where you stand with respect to the overall AFS client market. So as I said, from an AFS preparedness standpoint, we're really reaching the end of this process, and it's being handed over to you, the banks, to be able to be prepared, to be able to implement. I am going to now ask Charles to talk a little bit about what's happening in the market, latest developments from ARC and from some of the other banking institutions. So Charles, if you're there, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dean, and good afternoon, everyone. Like Dean said, we're really coming to the end of this process unless anything new comes up. But from what we are hearing in the market, most of the decisions at this point have been made. So for today, we're just going to talk about the latest conversations and anything we think has not yet been closed out, any outstanding loophole. So let's start with the most recent announcements. We all know at this point the official announcement for the transition that was made on March 5th by the ICE benchmark administrator. So what they basically made official is all the existing 35 LIBOR settings will completely cease or be non-representative at the end of June 2023. But the 1 week and the 2-month LIBOR will still cease at the end of this year, 2021. So December 2021, we expect those two tenors under the US dollar to end. also the rest of the other tenors, the sterling, the euro, the Swiss franc, the Japanese yen, those tenors also for the LIBOR will end we'll cease on at the end of December 2021 as well. So at least for the US market or the US dollar market, we still have room to transition our loans into the new alternative reference rates up until June 2023 for most of the outstanding tenors, which is your overnight, your 1 month, 3 month, 6 month, 12 month. Now, coming with that specific announcement, we already knew as soon as we get communication from the ICE benchmark administrator or the FCA, the spread adjustments will be set. So as of March 5th, in case anyone was still wondering what the spread adjustments will be, you can easily go to the Bloomberg website and you'll see all those spread adjustments have been set. One other thing that I think people are asking is, what if another announcement comes up that changes or delays, or rather delays this cessation? How will it affect the spread adjustments? They've been permanently set. No other announcements will change what their already published spread adjustments will be. So that's something good to note. The other thing is, I know there have been a lot of conversations surrounding the tough legacy contracts. And there was a push to get the New York State to sign into law details or information regarding how to transition those tough legacy loans, because the issue around them is when they were set, whenever they were set, they did not have good transition language, or they were just tough to negotiate in terms the LIBOR was not representative, because that's not something that they foresaw. So with this transition happening, it's going to be difficult to renegotiate. So that's why this law came in for especially contracts that are based on the New York US law, to give them some sort of protection and guidance on how to transition or how to operate going forward after LIBOR ceases. So I believe that was signed by Cuomo sometime this month, if I'm not mistaken. And when we talk about that transition and how it's going to be handled, some of the conversation out there was, can we have a quote unquote synthetic LIBOR rate that can be used to represent these tough legacy loans when the true regular LIBOR ceases? Now, one interesting fact about that, if for those who've listened to David Bowman on his Friday calls, is as much as we're calling it a synthetic LIBOR, and I'm putting this in quotes, it's not truly LIBOR. It's actually an aspect of a variant of SOFR plus a fixed ISDA rate. So the combination of that will be your synthetic LIBOR. Here comes the issue. With these tough legacy contracts, using that quote unquote LIBOR, synthetic LIBOR, is being looked at as though that's not a true LIBOR rate, or rather a fake rate. So the ARC is worried about litigations happening with those tough legacy loans if people are going to transition to such a rate. So hence why this law was important to be signed. So I don't know the full details. I'm not on the legal side, but it's something that your legal department should look into in case you have contracts that will not be easily transitioned after LIBOR ceases. So it's something you want to look at. Forward-looking term rate has been another one that is actually has been coming up on almost all ARC or business loans working group meetings or the LSTA meetings on when it's going to be available. The ARC on many occasions has said that they hope that they would have it by June or end of June this year. But as they've been analyzing the market, they're not so sure about that. So to the point where they had to come out again in the market and say, even as they're waiting for liquidity to keep rising on the derivative side, because that's the underpinning market to be able to recommend a forward term rate, they're not even sure that they will have one available at the end of this year. But the fact that the LIBOR cessation has been moved out to June 2023, they definitely hope by then it should be available. So they have a task force for it, but they don't think they'll be able to meet that expectation from the market by the end of this year. So they're still looking into it. With that being said, though, I know last week everyone was excited, or rather everyone was talking about the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Group launching their own CME term SOFR rate. Yeah, so that was launched, and I'll talk further into it as we go down the slides. But yes, that was launched by that exchange last week on the 21st. That does not mean that the ARC endorses that rate. So it's a rate based on their own volumes, their own underlying SOFR futures. But the banks who want to use it, they still can, but the ARC is not endorsing yet. It does not mean that they will not end up doing so. It's just that for now, they're not endorsing it, even though the CME group said that they're following the ARC's term SOFR provisions or principles. So no one is stopping you, but you can go ahead and analyze it and see if you can start using it now. And then in general, AFS, no matter the rates, based on everything that we've been hearing from the market, no matter the rates that are being mentioned out there, be it SOFR, be it the Bloomberg rate, the BSBY rate, the Maribor, AFS at the moment can support all the rates that are being discussed in the market. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, another hot topic in the market is to do with credit sensitive rates. So there was a group, I think I've said this before, there was a working group that was formed, I believe, sometime last year, and they've met maybe 4 or 5 times. We as a vendor were not invited, so I'm not so sure of how many times they've met, but I think it's about 4 or 5 times. And what they were concerned about is the fact that SOFR is a risk-free overnight rate. LIBOR was not. And LIBOR rate had a bank credit risk component embedded in the rate. SOFR doesn't. So how do they bridge that gap? They needed to have this additional rate, which they could add to the SOFR rate to cover that risk, to avoid any hoarding by the borrowers or the lenders not wanting to actually fund their borrowers because of the state of the market. Sometimes when the market is stressed, they want to cover themselves and not just lend out money at a low cost when it's actually costing them as the bank a lot to borrow from other banks, right? So that's why this credit sensitivity concept really came out in the market late in the game. So with that being said, the Fed, the FDIC, and other agencies, they do recognize that banks have different funding models that differ from one another, right? Because of that, they're not forcing anyone to use, for example, what the ARC has proposed, which is just SOFR. They're letting the banks make their own determination of the rate that they think fits their internal profiles to go ahead and lend their money. So that's why the LSTA is now coming in and helping, because at the end of the day, when the LSTA is representing the members, they're not just basing everything on the ARC. They're saying, okay, we do understand that the ARC just won SOFR, but there are other risks associated with it. How can we assist to make sure that you transition safely, be it your syndications or bilateral loans? So they did publish an advisory which addresses this credit sensitivity option. And they're proposing, I don't know if they've already done it yet, but they're proposing to have that credit sensitivity rate concept added to the hardwired fallback language for any interested members. So if you've not heard about that, or you're not, you want more details on that concept for the advisory, you can go to the LSTA website and get more information. Basically, what you're going to find there, all they're doing is just saying, okay, the advisory is more guiding you to select a specific credit sensitivity rate. And also there's a hierarchy of the different credit sensitivity alternatives that are out there in the market. So it's more so a guide in case you're interested. Because the other thing that is giving these credit sensitivity rates momentum is the fact that our regular daily simple SOFR and the compounded SOFR, these are rates that are changing every day, right? So you do not know the interest that the borrower needs to pay 30 days in advance, right? If you're doing daily simple or compounded in arrears calculations. But these credit sensitivity rates, most of them, the ones that are currently in the market, you already know in advance. So for example, the ones that are more popular, right, is the US dollar ICE bank yield, the Maribor, the BISB, and the IHS market. The first three, you can either use them as standalone, which is you're just going to use that rate plus your margin based on your credit agreement to get your all-in rate, and then you do your regular interest calculation, simple interest calculation. So you can either use them as a standalone or you can add them to SOFR, the first three. But the IHS market one is more so of a supplement or an adjustment that you're adding to your existing SOFR rate, for example. So on a daily basis, you will be taking your SOFR rate plus your IHS market adjustment rate and adding the two, and then the sum of the two, you can either do simple interest calculation, or you can do your compounded in arrears if you want to do a daily calculation based on the same, based on the ever-changing SOFR rate. Then you can do your compounding in arrears if you choose to. Can we handle all of them, all those variants as of now for what we know? Yes. And let's go to the next slide. I want to show what AFS has. Okay. So in Vision, in our system, in Vision, the rates are fed onto system admin, what we call system admin for those who are Vision. They go into system admin, and I can set up rates. I can feed the rates from the Fed website that are my daily SOFR published rate. Also, we have a functionality relationship functionality between rates, that we can do higher off, lower off. We just add average off, and now we recently added sum off, whereby if you look at the side of the screen to my right, to the right side of the screen, you will see I added two rates, which is the SOFR daily published rate and the SOFR IHS market credit sensitivity rate. What this is doing is taking the sum of these two rates, and when now you look at the left side of the screen, on the third column, under my published rate is the result of that. So the result of the sum of those two rates is what we're using as our published rate for that day. And then we start our regular compounding process, whereby we get our effective rate, cumulative rate, non-cumulative rate, and then annualized rate. And then when you get your annualized rate, you can add in your spread from the credit agreement, and you get your all-in rate, and then you proceed to do your, the system will proceed to calculate the interest for that day based on a simple interest calculation. So we added that to make sure that we cover all potential methodologies that we've heard of so far from the market related to this credit sensitivity rate. So we already had that functionality. We just went ahead and added one more layer to it. Okay. So let's go to the next slide.
Hey, Charles, I'm going to interrupt you because I got a question. And while we're on that topic, what you showed, of course, is functionality that we've added with Vision going forward for our clients. For those that are still running in level 3, if you're looking to use that credit sensitivity rate in that same manner, then please reach out to us individually, and we can talk about how to support that on the level 3 platform, until you get to Vision. Okay. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, Dean. Okay. I know by now you've already heard AmeriBor being one of the rates that is really being pushed out there in the market as an alternative. And the reason why we are highlighting AmeriBor is simply because for these rates to start being adopted by the market, we know some people are waiting to see someone else do it first, quote unquote, as a guinea pig, and then they'll see if it actually works for them, and then they can adopt it. So hearing that Zion's Banco actually went public and said that they're going to be using AmeriBor, especially for their bilateral loans, that was encouraging news. And we want to see more and more banks or financial institutions actually make a firm statement out in the market confirming the alternative rate that they want to use, and not just be limited to the one that ARC is recommending, which is SOFR. So Zion's really did their own internal analysis, looked at their lending profile, and made a decision that the alternative, that the AmeriBor rate works for them. And I can make my own personal guess is mostly related to this credit sensitivity aspect, because AmeriBor, like I said earlier, already has the credit sensitivity rate or concept embedded in the rate. So when they're consuming it, internally, they'll just use it the same way they use LIBOR rates today. I believe AmeriBor has an overnight rate and a 30-day, an overnight rate and a 30-day tenor. I think there has been conversation out there to have one with a 3-month tenor. I cannot confirm that for now, but I can check and confirm at a later point. But the fact that it's available, and as we know, most of the loans in the transition for now, for SOFR ones, most of them will go to 30 days. But there are people who want to keep their contracts exactly how they used to be when they were under the LIBOR benchmark. So contracts that had 3 months or 6 months, a lot of banking institutions want to keep that, and they want to make things as seamless as possible. Hence why using a variable rate, which is known in advance and has all similar qualities like a LIBOR rate, that's why you see it being discussed in out in the market a lot. So I don't know your experience internally, but Dean, I believe we have a poll question around this.
Yes, we do. So, we asked this question in a couple different ways early, previously, and we thought it would be good to see if things are changing in the market. So do you think Ameribor or these other alternative rates will become more prevalent than SOFR? So please cast your vote. This is not obviously a scientific poll, but it would be interesting to see what people are thinking now. Early on, everything was focused on SOFR as the single replacement for LIBOR, but now we've seen many other alternatives start to be offered. So we would be curious to know if the market is making an actual shift away from SOFR as the prevalent replacement for LIBOR. So Renee, are we ready with some responses?
We are, Dane. Here we go.
So 59% are saying no. I'm reading that as 59% are saying still SOFR will be the most prevalent replacement for LIBOR, but the 41% saying something other than SOFR, that's definitely a higher number than it was a year ago. So again, we thank you for the responses. Hope that's helpful for you today, just to see where people's minds are for going forward. Charles, I think you wanted to talk a little bit more about forward-looking term SOFR, right?
Correct. And thank you for those responses, because even though the Ameribor one was lower, it's good because at least people are getting educated. More and more people are getting educated around it. So it's not like there was a business loans working group around Ameribor, right? So the more people are getting knowledge and understanding of SOFR and the other alternatives, I think we might see more of a 50-50 ratio farther down the line as we go through the year. So that's good to know. Okay. So I did talk more earlier about the forward-looking term, and we know that what is being pushed for is to have 5 tenors to do with when it comes to the forward-looking term. We do have today LIBOR contracts that go out for a year, right? Even though they might have quarterly payments. So people might not want to get rid of the 12-month tenor or the 6-month tenor just because they're long. I know there are, prior was just proposing to go only up to 3 months, but I guess the push is still out there. So they're aware of all those different tenors that are being asked for by the market participants, and their task force is continuously looking at the derivatives market to make sure that they can truly formulate based on based on the volumes, right? Based on the volumes as we go farther and farther into 2022, 2023. So hopefully we can get something done by then. But one thing about this, about the forward-looking term is, because they know they don't have it, even though it's the first option on the fallback language, right? We go from term SOFR as being the first option, and then simple daily SOFR as the second step. The ARC is still asking people to transition to the other steps as soon as practicable, and not have to wait for this term SOFR to be recommended and or published. But as we also said earlier, there are other term rates out there that are available if you want. The ARC is not preventing you from doing so. The other thing to note is, if you go, even though you're following the ARC's recommendations, there is this concept called flip forward. What basically flip forward means is, all right, I don't have term SOFR today. I don't know when it's gonna get recommended by the ARC. But in the meantime, I need to transition my loans to SOFR, so I can go to the next step, simple, daily simple, or compounded in arrears. And then whenever this term SOFR is available, then this flip forward concept means that you are allowed by the ARC conventions to flip back from a daily SOFR or daily compounded SOFR back to your preferred first step, which is the term SOFR. So as you're drafting your credit agreements during the transition, that's something else that you would want to put in mind or put in place in your documentation, to avoid any discrepancies or any legal matters just because of you as an agent deciding to flip from an already selected step in your fallback. So something else I wanted to bring to your attention. If you watched the most recent symposium, I think actually it was the first one by the ARC, whereby we also had representation from our UK counterparts on the Sterling Working Group. One interesting concept or thing they brought up was the fact that in Europe, or in that market, I think it was in January, they already have a term SONIA rate. But in terms of adoption, actually 90% of all new loans are based on compounded in arrears, as opposed to the term SONIA. So that's such a high rate because they've had a lot of new loans this year already, and I think the statistics that they brought up were 56% of those new loans. 90% of those new loans, even though a term SOFR was available, they were actually written based on compounded in arrears, and they believe that so far they've been easily operationalized. So that's something interesting to note, because one of our fears here on the US market is compounded methodology, or compounded SOFR in general, is very complex. Now, when we talk about trading and all that stuff, the LMA market does not do a lot as compared to our US market, the LSTA side. So maybe that might be a factor. I'm not so sure, but it's just something interesting to note that so far from the UK side, compounded in arrears seems to be operational and more preferred as the alternative for SOFR. Still on forward-looking term SOFR, the ARC did make some key principles in terms of how they will determine the criteria of confirming, or rather of recommending, a term SOFR. So the first one is it needs to meet the ARC's criteria. What that basically just means is the methodology of calculating the available SOFR rates today. They need to make sure whatever term SOFR is out there in the market, it follows the same guidelines of how that rate was attained. So that's number one. Also, it must be rooted, and I'm just quoting them exactly, it must be rooted in a robust and sustainable base of derivative transactions over time. So even though there are derivatives based on SOFR today, they need that to go on, they need to watch it over a longer period of time to make sure that is robust and sustainable. So they just don't want to recommend just because they have some derivatives out there that are using SOFR. Then the last piece is they have to have a limited scope of use. So here is their worry. They believe, so the derivatives market is using SOFR. They believe that if the cash products, all or most cash products, if most of them use this term rate unproportionately, then that will overwhelm the derivatives market that underpin the SOFR rate today. So they need them to be in parallel, and that's why they want them to be, they want the scope of use to be limited. I really don't know how they can control that, but that's part of their principles for them to be able to recommend this forward-looking term SOFR rate. Now let me get back to the CME announcement for just a little bit, because if you go to their website, those three principles that I just mentioned, they do state that they meet them, but that's really based on their own understanding, right? I'm not so sure how much they did work with the ARC, but yes, because those principles are public, then yes, they can follow them based on their own understanding. The ARC has not, even though they are aware of that rate as of last week, they have not endorsed it, but that does not mean they might not endorse it, because that rate apparently meets the IOSCO and the BMR regulations, or rather they are compliant with those two agencies. But they also do say, the ARC also do say, or rather the Business Laws Working Group, you can go ahead and use that rate. There's nothing stopping you. So that's something to note. And so far, the tenors that are available for the CME rate is a 1 month, a 3 month, and a 6 month tenor. And talking about the last point or principle of limiting the scope based on the ARC recommendations, the CME group, even though it's going to be free of charge, they will limit the use of that rate via licensing. So at least I can say from my understanding, okay, that's something that I can vouch and say, okay, at least they're meeting one of the criteria from the ARC, or rather key principles from the ARC. I'm not sure about the calculations, which is the very first principle. So for now, I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions that came through, and we can discuss them.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. And I know we had some questions. We were able to work them in. I think I had one additional question from early on about, we talked about observation shift work. I think for the level 3 clients, when we asked about observation shift, there was not much endorsement of utilizing that function. So we did not deliver that as part of our base SOFR capability. If you are still planning to do that, maybe because you're booking the derivatives on level 3 or whatever, please reach out to AFS and we can talk to you individually about the ability to do that support on the level 3 platform. We can go to the next slide, and if anybody else has questions, please submit them. But let me just remind you that we have several upcoming webinars on the calendar, and our regular RMA AFS Risk Analysis Service webinar will be coming up at the end of the month, which is actually 2 days from now, just realized. And of course, we have a full slate of webinars through the month of May, and we've already scheduled another best practices webinar in June on RPA or robotics in commercial lending. So quite a bit of activity coming up. We appreciate your time today for this topic on SOFR. We'll schedule another update as I think we finally have transitioned now, and we'll start seeing more deals that are being written under SOFR terms or AMERIBOR or whatever other alternative rates that might be utilized. But we will continue to share with you our experiences and best practices on this particular topic. So Renee, thank you for organizing this today. Again, remember to stay in touch with AFS, whether it's our website, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can find us in many different places. So please stay connected. And thank you very much. And we hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.